Welcome to this lesson on Introduction to Blockchain Technology presented by Coding Bootcamps. And this is the impact of ledgers on society. We've had our introduction about the instructor, some information about the instructor. So to recap, what we learned so far are some basic high-level architecture of blockchain. We learned about Bitcoin and its origins. And so now we're going to talk about ledgers. So at its heart, a blockchain is a digital ledger. So we can see here a very, very simple ledger. And so how do ledgers work? Well, they list what a entry, the entries on here list what somebody owns. So you can see here there are accounts, and we do indicate how much is owned by that account. So when we update a ledger, actually nothing is changed. Another record is added to the ledger. So ledgers tend to be append only. And then we find out a balance simply by summing up all of the entries for a particular account. And although ledgers seem quite simple, they've had a great impact on society. So as we can imagine, back in maybe the hunting and gathering days, people did not own much more than they could carry. So there was no reason to really write down what somebody owned. But once we began to advance into the agricultural age, suddenly we began producing more than what we needed. At that time, then, it became necessary to actually indicate or write down what you owned. And it was in these times that record of ownership or ledgers came into existence. And once people knew what they owned and they could prove it, this facilitated trade. And then the double entry ledger made it possible to facilitate trade using third parties to maintain the ledger for two or more other parties. So this type of ledger facilitated not only trade between the villages, but also trade between nations. So if we didn't have that double entry ledger, chances are you were very limited to just your local village or just a few people, because the updating the ledgers were fairly simple, fairly straightforward. So you couldn't go beyond those that you actually know. So once trade between nations was facilitated, that led to technological discoveries. It gave rise to financial services, banks, other types of insurance services. And so ledgers have truly impacted society. And there are those that would say that blockchain is a triple entry ledger. And we can take a look at that. So we see here that a blockchain does have a ledger that does have, although it's not in this straightforward form, does have the double entry, the debit, the credit, who had the asset and who has it now. How much of the asset did person A have? And then what did they give to person B, and how much more does person B have now? That is part of the blockchain. But then there is an introduction of a mathematical hash, and we're going to see why this hash is important. Essentially, a hash is a digest of data that's very, very sensitive to changes, and this is one of the ways that we actually secure our blockchain, and one of the ways that we say it's immutable. Since a hash is very sensitive to changes, we'll know if any changes are made. So on the blockchain, transactions are written into a block, and a block is essentially a file. So block size is limited on most blockchains, and it's usually limited to 1 megabyte. There can be exceptions to that, and that's usually done to prevent runaway blocks. Around 25 transactions go into a block. And again, that's just the keep order. Once we get into 25, 26, it's time to validate the block and then start on the next block. So blocks are added to the blockchain. So a block again contains the listings of the transactions. So blocks are never removed or updated. And if a block could be updated, we would no longer trust it. So again, we can see here some similar types of transactions that may be listed in the blockchain, that Bill sent Mary $14, Tom received $6 from Peggy, and so on. So these are the types. This is a simplified view of what we might actually see in a blockchain block. We talked about this a little earlier about double spending. So double spending with any electronic asset has always been an issue. And the way that we are addressing it here is once a transaction is completed, the transaction must be validated. So we can see in this case that Sam has one coin. I'm calling it N coin here. And Sam completed two transactions with the same coin. And obviously here, one of these, Sam gives away his one coin to one of these other accounts. And so Sam cannot use it twice. So one of these transactions, most likely this one here, would then be declined. And so what we really talked about is that function of the ledger and how ledgers help advance society, a brief history of how ledgers advance society. And we talked about how Bitcoin addresses double spending and the nature of a block. So please go in and take a look at this assessment a little further, and maybe we could talk about a little here. What is the basic functionality of a ledger? Think about what that is. And how did ledgers help society advance? So let's think about that. And the double spend, how is that solved by the miners? Because we talked about miners in the previous lesson. Please, for more resources here, please take a look at this additional information. Please check your learning materials. And again, please check your learning materials. And if you're interested in more training, please take a look at these additional training resources. Our next session, we are going to talk about blockchain structure and types. Thank you.